Hello everyone, this is Damon here with Pixnub Software, and in this video I'm just going to be giving a brief overview of Easy Green Screen 6.5, and this is the version I've been talking about for a while in the Facebook group that includes an HTML panel for CC 2018, and that's actually CC 2018.1 or higher. Now with 6.5, this is the first version that's going to include a panel. And this is also a hybrid version, meaning that there is the normal Easy Green Screen filter, and then there is an additional HTML panel for CC 2018. So if you're a CS5 or CS6 user, you still have the normal Easy Green Screen. Moving forward for development for version 7, which will probably be coming early 2019, the user interface should hopefully be 100% migrated over to all HTML panel. So for this version, the HTML panel is more or less for post-extraction editing and trying to solve some of the problems with editing if you need to touch things up, because I think it gives a little bit better environment to use a panel because you're in Photoshop at the same time you're using that panel instead of just in the filter, so you have full control of Photoshop. So to get started, I'm going to show you how to install the panel. I'm going to switch back to the standard Photoshop workspace, and to bring a panel up, what you do is you go to Window, Extensions, and then there'll be an Easy Green Screen 6 panel after this is installed. And when you first bring it up, it's going to put it usually in this this little pop-out menu here. That is if you're using the standard Essentials workspace. Depending on how the workspace is set up, it may appear in a slightly different location, but it typically will put it right here. Now this is, once the panel is open, it acts just like any other Windows user interface panel. You can put that inside of your Photoshop interface pretty much wherever you want, and you can scale the size within reason to, I guess it's scalable to where I set the scaling dimensions, so it's not going to let you squeeze it any farther down than needed to display all of the buttons. What I recommend doing is creating your own workspace and putting that to wherever you like to work with it, and then setting up any other workspace items that you want when you're working with green screen, and then saving your own workspace. So if I just reset the essentials here, this is now the standard Photoshop workspace. What I've done for myself is created a workspace called Easy Green Screen, which has all of the items that I use when I'm doing green screen work, and it puts it kind of in a usable spot where I would like to work with it. So once you have a workspace set up, you just go into Window, Workspace, and then New Workspace, and you give it a name, and then you've got your own custom workspace. So that way you can switch back and forth between the standard Photoshop workspaces and your own custom space. This is not necessary, but it is what I recommend doing. And you can create as many workspaces as you want for different things that you're doing in Photoshop. Alright, so to get started, as mentioned, this panel right now is set up for post-extraction editing, because I felt that that was the part of Easy Green Screen where users got the most confused. It's if they need to edit things or touch things up. There was kind of a mindset that locked people in thinking they have to do all the editing inside of the Easy Green Screen filter window, when in reality, how Easy Green Screen was designed was to do any kind of touch-up work in Photoshop in the Easy Green Screen layering system. And so I've tried to make that a little bit simpler, and there are some actually pretty powerful things you can do with this. So to get started, none of these buttons will actually do anything. You see if I click on them, they're not doing anything. Some things are giving me messages that say they can't do anything. That's because all of this stuff here is meant to work with the Easy Green Screen extraction layer set. So the first thing you have to do is extract the image to use any of these buttons down here. Now in the top extraction section, you've got single mask and dual mask, and those do the exact same thing as the filter options for single and dual mask. They're exactly the same. The two buttons below that are for skipping the user interface. So this will make a single mask extraction, but it will not pop up the Easy Green Screen Filter user interface. It just uses the default settings. So I'm just going to demonstrate here. This image is pretty low res, so it wouldn't really benefit from dual mask. So I'm just going to run the normal single mask extraction, and you'll see in a moment this is going to pop up the Easy Green Screen 6 filter menu, or the filter user interface. Now, as mentioned, for 6.5, this version is a hybrid. It uses the standard Easy Green Screen filter interface. With version 7, this stuff is going to actually migrate into the panel. So just keep that in mind. The only difference here between 6.5 and 6.2, which was the release before 6.5, but the only difference in the Easy Green Screen filter itself is in the spill correction. There's actually a new adjustment called Use Green Desaturation Layer. I'll discuss this more a little bit in this video, but more so in an additional video that discusses what that does. I'm just going to apply this here. Okay, so now you see we're back in Photoshop. We've got full control of all of our Photoshop menu, but we've also got the Easy Green Screen panel still up. And so now we can use all of these adjustments that are inside the panel. So before I get into this, I'm just going to discuss a couple other things with 6.5 that's different from previous versions. And the first thing is in the history panel. Easy Green Screen will now add a history state called Easy Green Screen, and then it also sets the history brush to that state. And what this is for is, let's say you make a bunch of editing and you want to either use the history brush on this state, which I'll show that in a future video. That gets a little more complicated, but it gives you the ability to go right back to the image as it was right after you extracted. So for example, let's say you went and did some stuff to the mask and there was too many history states and those rolled off of your available history. The only thing you'd have to do at that point is go into your history, and you could easily go right back to the history as it was right when it was extracted. So the next thing that version 6.5 does is it adds an original layer to the top, and that's hidden by default. But this layer is good for if you have a difficult image and you want to make some manual selections based on the original green screen image. You can just set this layer on, see the original image, and make your selections. Now with the non-destructive Easy Green Screen layer set, you do have the original image still inside of the layer set, but it's kind of tedious and kind of a pain if you need to get to that. You have to disable your mask and disable your spill correction to be able to see that original image. So it's quite handy just to have that layer right on top. A couple more things is in your layer stack, there's now that desaturate green layer. Basically what that does is if there's any green spill remaining, it'll just desaturate that and turn that grayscale, which is actually a common technique. If you go search YouTube for green screen extractions, that's actually what's taught most. It was originally introduced by Russell Brown years ago to just desaturate the greens. Now, while that gets rid of the green, it doesn't actually fix color, it just makes it grayscale. So this spill correction layer is what is trying to fix the color in your image. So it's trying to get skin tones back to their original color, the hair tones back to their original color. But if that doesn't quite get rid of all the green, there's an additional, I don't know what to, it's a green spill insurance policy. So if the spill correction doesn't do its job, this is the catch-all that finishes it off. I'll explain this in a lot more detail in another video, so let's just move on here. There used to be a layer called manual spill correction. Now there's 2 layers. They're renamed. They're paint color blend and paint normal blend. And these are just where if you need to paint color back into your image. This bottom one is in color blend mode. The top one is in normal blend mode. I will demonstrate these in another video. Oh, and by the way, all 4 of these layers are clipped to your foreground layer, so they're only affecting the cutout and not the rest of the image. Okay, so now that I got all that out of the way for the layers, I know most people when they extract, they just want to extract and get it to a single layer, put it in a background and move on. So built into the panel, if your extraction looks good, which in this case I chose an extraction that had some issues just so I could demonstrate some things, but if your extraction looks good, you just hit merge all. That puts everything into a single layer and it's ready to go to put into your background image. Control Z to undo that. And so notice when we're in the panel, I've got control of all of my keyboard shortcuts. Unlike when you're in the Easy Green Screen filter menu, Photoshop really restricts, and I tried my best to gain as much access to Photoshop as I could, but Photoshop just restricts access to most of its keyboard functionality and menu functionality while you're in a filter. So once you're in this panel, you have full control of all of that, which is great. That's why I'm going to HTML panels for the future development. Okay, anyway, moving on. If you hit merge foreground, that merges your foreground into a single layer, but it keeps the background image and the background color in case you're wanting to still work on that against the color. So Control Z again to undo that. Now let's move back up, and I'm going to start just working down top to bottom, going through kind of what these options do. So in the view mode, you can view mask, normal, or screen. If you choose to view the screen, the only thing that's doing is selecting that top original layer and showing it. If you view normal, that's actually selecting the foreground mask but viewing the entire image. If you view mask, that's still selecting the foreground mask, but it's viewing right inside the mask. And so the reason why this does that it selects that mask for you, because often you'll want to touch the mask up, which is actually the most common thing probably you'll want to do. But you may want to view the mask, or you may want to view the whole image while you're touching that mask up. So again, my keyboard shortcuts here work, so I can zoom in with Control plus. And this guitar had some green Rubik's Cube stickers on it. So let's say I want to just paint those back in. Oops, I got the brush set to black. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Set my brush. No, I don't want 5,000 pixels. Anyway, just set the brush. It's still got spill correction, but you can see we're painting the foreground back in. And so that's why these select the foreground, is because that's the most common thing you'll want to do is, or the foreground mask is, the most common thing you want to do is paint in that mask. So I've got my history state. I'm just going to go back to the regular extraction. And moving on, these 2 options are probably going to be the most common thing that people do inside of the panel, at least inside of the version 6.5 panel. And this is where you want to recover green or blue that was extracted. So there's 2 ways to do that. And the first way, if I just click this, that's going to do the same thing as this green on green recovery does. It's going to bring up that same green on green recovery system. I'll just demonstrate here. This is where it's using color analysis to separate the colors of green. This is probably not the greatest example for this. This is more meant if you had green clothing on the edges and you need to, for the system to depict the differences. Anyway, it works for this, but I'll be sure to do a better video with that. But it's the same as you've been using for the green on green recovery. And so I'm going to undo that. So the next thing we have, if you remember, if you're on the Facebook group and you saw a while back where there was an action that I released for very difficult green on green recovery, well, this button here does that same exact sequence. It's going to give you an additional foreground recovery layer, and then it's going to put a black mask in there so you're not actually seeing any of this layer. But what it's going to do is use the Photoshop select. In CC 2018, there's this new select subject feature that's going to make an artificial intelligent selection of your image. It's going to try to find your subject. It usually does an okay job, but not perfect. But what this does is it makes that, if you see we've got the marching ants around our selection here, but it makes that initial selection for us. And you could also go in and use some of your tools to refine that selection. I'm not going to do that for this. Again, I'll dedicate an entire video to that. But it also, when you select this button, it selects your brush automatically and it will reset the swatches. So you just start painting. And the great thing about with that select subject, if it makes a good selection, you can paint over the edges. And so you're only bringing foreground back in to anything that's inside of that selection. So that's real handy if you have green clothing or whatever that's right against the border. You don't have to be precise with your brushing. Again, I will discuss this in more depth in another tutorial. So let's move on here. I'm going to go back to the original extraction again. Actually not. Let's leave that where it was. So the next thing is this contract mask. So if I just click this, it actually deselects everything before it runs, so that way it can contract this original mask. I'm going to undo that here. Let's actually deselect this. I think we can see it a little bit better. It's put this against, let's go against a white background because we'll see it, I think, a little better on the edge. So if I just do a contract mask, you can see it contracts that edge in. I just Control Z to undo that. We've also got contract 2 pixels, which does the same thing, but it does more. I'm just going to click this 3 or 4 times. So it ran through that sequence a bunch of times so you can really see what it's doing. Now I contracted this 6 times, so it actually sucked that in 12 pixels. In a real situation, you're obviously not going to do that, but just to show you what this is doing is the reason I did that. You've also got in here the select and mask. This is just going to pull up Photoshop select and mask tool, and so you could manually brush in. It also selects the refine edge brush. You could brush that in, use any of the select and mask features. I'm just going to cancel this. Again, there'll be a tutorial dedicated to that. There's the select subject, which does the exact same thing as the Photoshop select subject. I just put that in the menu because it's easy to have everything you want just in this panel here. The only thing that does is makes the select subject selection. That way you have that to do any Photoshop work you want to do with the touch-ups. You can, of course, go in with your tools and go in and refine that selection better. So you've got that. I'm going to undo that. That's actually... Alright, so moving on, we've got levels here because this is a common thing you'll want to do is to run a levels on your mask. So if you just click this, the levels here, it's going to take you into your mask. And this is working just on the foreground mask, but you can see we can adjust the levels of our mask. Say we had a little more background we needed to clear out, or a little more foreground we need to force. This is probably not a very good image to demonstrate this, but this just gives you the ability to control the mask levels after extraction. I just canceled that, so I'm not actually doing that. We've got the one called Levels FG. I have limited space for these buttons, so what that means is Levels Foreground. If I click on this, it's not actually adjusting the levels of your foreground. It's still adjusting the levels of the mask, but you're just viewing the foreground. I don't have a good image in this one to demonstrate. At least this image itself is not a good one. So again, I'll demonstrate this on another video, but this is adjusting the levels of your mask while you're viewing the foreground. Most commonly, you would use that for difficult hair situations where you wanted to view the hair itself while you're adjusting the mask levels. The other thing is dual levels, and this image was not extracted in dual mask mode. So I'll dedicate another video to this too, but if you've selected a dual mask selection and you select either of these levels, you'll be adjusting the mask levels, but only for that hair selection you made and not for the rest of the image. Alright, next item. I'm going to hide this. So you see in this image there's some clutter because the screen did not cover the frame of the camera. And this auto clear, what this is doing is it's going to clear or automatically clear selection or areas outside of your main subject. What this does is it runs select and mask, and then it will either contract or expand that mask and then clear everything else out. It's best to just demonstrate, it'll make more sense. So by default it's set to 100 pixels. If I hit auto clear, it's running this auto mask cleanup, and you can see it got rid of all that background clutter. How it actually accomplished that is it put a layer mask into this group. And you can see that layer mask is a rough outline of our subject, but it's doing that non-destructively. So if I disable this layer mask, you see we still have that stuff there. It's non-destructive because it's using an additional layer mask. That way, if it, let's say for instance, it cut part of this guitar off because it didn't see that as part of our main subject. Alright, I'm just going to have to simulate this here because it actually did pretty good for this. But let's say, for example, alright. No, I'm on a white brush. I was struggling to find out why that didn't work and I got distracted there. Okay, anyway, let's say that the auto clear cleared out part of the guitar, and so you're panicking now saying, oh, it cleared everything out, but then it cleared part of my guitar. Or for the sports world, say they're holding a baseball bat. The only thing you have to do at that point is grab this mask, and by default, when you run this, it's going to reset your swatches and it's going to give you the brush tool. So the only thing you have to do is go brush back over that area. You don't have to find the lines. You just need to brush over that whole area, because what you're actually doing is you're now telling it to include that entire area you're brushing, but it's already being masked by this lower mask, if that makes sense. So a better way to understand this, let's fill this whole thing with white. So by default, if there's no mask, it will be treated as if the mask is entirely filled with white, which means that we are including everything inside this group in the final merged composition. So you see if I throw this away, it's including that in the final composition, everything. So if I run this again, no, I clicked the wrong one. Sorry, my brain's getting lost here. Let's run auto clear again. That's what we want to run. So what this is doing is it's saying only use anything in this area as part of the extraction, but you can see that's a rough outline. but the actual extraction outline is much better. So it's using two masks combined, more or less, to create your final result. Then once you're happy, again, you merge all, and you've got your image just like you want it. So I've got another image, actually the same image as this. So that in itself is handy to clear the background, but you can also use that in a much more advanced way. And what we've got here is an image where it's the same image. I just actually cropped this one closer for the video because I wanted to demonstrate this last, kind of the power of what this auto clear can do for you. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this, just do a single mask. I'm going to do a single mask skip UI just so you can see that, how it's not going to actually bring up the Easy Green Screen user interface. Okay, so it just extracts with the default, puts us right back in Photoshop. So let's run through this whole sequence. I'm just going to add a manual recovery layer. I'm just going to go through the whole extraction sequence that I would go through for this. Okay, it gives us a white brush to start with, so I brush, Control Z. Because select subject, as I mentioned prior, it does a decent extraction, but it doesn't do perfect. If you paint over some of these areas, it's not being included. But in this case, select subject thought this was part of our subject. So that's why it's select subject by itself is not a perfect selection. But in any case, let's just continue on. Brush in that green area. So now we got that. And now I'm going to run this clear, auto clear, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Let's set this to 0. So what the 0 is going to do is it's going to run the select subject, but it's not going to expand or contract, and then it's going to auto clear everything outside of that. You can actually go -3, so it cuts it into the foreground as well, but I'll save that for another video. So you see what it did is it got rid of everything, but in the case of this image, select subject actually saw that arm. So I'm going to run select subject just so we can add that, and I'm just going to continue on. So in any case, it did a pretty good job of clearing most of the background, but if you need to finish it off, let's go into our mask here, make sure you're on a black brush, clear that off, and if you remember, actually, I'm going to go a different route here. So select subject cleared more of our mask. It actually made the hair kind of choppy the way it cleared that. So what we can do is we only want to apply that to the feet area. You can grab a white brush. This might be hard to see here. This is kind of more advanced. I should have saved this for an advanced video. But nonetheless, we're to this point, so I'm just going to power through this. So we've got our mask here. And that auto clear cleared more of the hair than we wanted. So we just paint those areas we want to brush back in. I'm going to make sure I grab a hard brush here. Okay, so I'm just going to paint back in. You see, oops, Control Z here. You see it also erased some of that guitar, and that was because I put 0 there, so it was relying slowly on select mask. Okay, let's undo that again. Let's see. Okay, so we painted back in, so now more or less we've got, or we do have the exact same extraction from our foreground mask, anything above, but we've still got, I brushed back in some of that original mask, which didn't erase the concrete. So now where this is where this can get, if you know what you're doing, this can get pretty cool. So I'm going to go in and grab this history brush here. Actually, I don't think I'll need that for this. I'm just going to go grab the, I'm going to save that again for another video. So, actually, I take that back. I am going to do the history brush. I'm going to go to where it's the auto mask cleanup, but I'm going to set that on this. Grab the history brush. And the brush is a soft brush here. But in any case, we can see that we can go right over the edges and brush that off. So now we've preserved the original extraction mask, and we've found a decent way to automatically extract the rest of it in a non-destructive manner, because we're using a separate mask for that. If I lost you the last few minutes, stay tuned. There's going to be another video specifically for that. For each of these items, I'm going to break it down into a better video that you can just follow step by step, because really with this panel you can do some very, very advanced editing in a very quick amount of time if you know exactly how to use it. So I hope I didn't overwhelm everyone here, but just know that this panel for doing post-extraction touch-up work is going to save you a lot of time once you learn how to use that. And Easy Green Screen 7 eventually is going to go 100% into this panel. And so that's about it. So anyway, thanks for watching. And if you're interested at all in Easy Green Screen, please be sure to visit our website. That is pixnub.com. There's also a download link in this video description, or there's a link to the web page where you can download Easy Green Screen. Thanks for watching.